AITA for making my cousin's pregnant girlfriend sleep on the couch over Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving this year was supposed to be special, or at least that's how my Aunt Diane made it sound when she called me up a couple of months ago. Aunt Diane, who's in her early 60s, lives in this sprawling house that's honestly a perfect setting for big family gatherings. She loves hosting, and she's good at it too. But this year, she seemed even more excited than usual. She kept saying how it had been way too long since the entire family came together and how this year, she was determined to make it happen. She especially wanted me, my sister, her husband, and their kids to come. I don't have kids or a partner, so it's usually just me at these events. But I could hear the eagerness in her voice. "It's going to be great," she said. "We'll all be together again like the old days. And you have to stay here at the house, okay? No hotels. I want us to spend as much time together as possible." Now, normally I would have been a little hesitant. Don't get me wrong, I love my family, but historically, these kinds of gatherings haven't been the best for me. Being the only single, childless adult in the family means I usually end up getting the short end of the stick when it comes to sleeping arrangements. 9 times out of 10, I'm stuck on the living room couch, or worse, an air mattress on the floor. It's not just uncomfortable, it's a full-on nightmare. I'm overweight, which makes sleeping on a couch or a deflating air mattress an absolute disaster for my back. I wake up stiff, sore, and miserable. And let's not even talk about the logistics of trying to sleep in the middle of the living room. I can't fall asleep until the younger adults finish hanging out, usually around 1 a.m., and then I'm up again by 6 a.m. because someone's already clanging around making coffee. My luggage always gets moved to some random corner, and I end up feeling like an afterthought. After years of this, I made a personal rule for myself: if I couldn't have an actual bed in an actual room, with a door that closes, I'd book a hotel room. No more compromising on my sleep and my comfort. So, before I agreed to Aunt Diane's invitation, I made sure to clarify the sleeping situation. I asked her point blank if I'd have a bed in a room with a door. She reassured me that I would. She even laughed and said, "Of course, honey. You'll have your own room. Don't worry about a thing." With that assurance, I agreed to go. Thanksgiving week rolled around, and I showed up at Aunt Diane's house ready to make the best of it. To my surprise, she really delivered on her promise. She had given me my own room with a queen bed. It wasn't some fancy guest room, but it had a proper bed and a door that I could shut at the end of the day. I was thrilled. All the adults had real beds, while the kids were on couches and air mattresses, but I didn't feel guilty. For once, I wasn't the one getting shuffled to the floor. It felt like a win. The first night was wonderful. I slept like a baby in that queen bed, and for once, I woke up without my back screaming at me. I even texted a friend about how shocked I was that I'd gotten such a great setup. It was shaping up to be the best Thanksgiving in years. But then, everything changed the day before Thanksgiving. It was mid-afternoon, and we were all in the kitchen preparing food or lounging around the living room when the front door swung open. In walked my cousin Nick, grinning ear to ear like he'd just pulled off the surprise of the century. Right behind him was his girlfriend, Tessa, carefully cradling her baby bump as she stepped into the house. She looked a little nervous but managed a polite smile as Nick announced, "Surprise. We made it after all." Nick had always been the kind of person who thrived on making big entrances. He loved being the center of attention, and this was no exception. Aunt Diane's face lit up immediately, and she rushed over to hug him and Tessa. "I thought you said you couldn't make it," she exclaimed, her voice a mix of shock and excitement. Nick laughed and explained that he'd told her he couldn't come because of work, but he'd managed to rearrange his schedule at the last minute. "We wanted to surprise you," he said, beaming. Now, on paper, it was a sweet gesture. Who doesn't love a good holiday surprise? But as I stood there watching the scene unfold, my stomach sank a little. I could already feel the ripple effect of their unplanned arrival. Aunt Diane had meticulously planned this gathering, right down to who was sleeping where, and Nick's surprise completely threw a wrench into everything. It wasn't just Nick, Tessa was with him, and she was 6 months pregnant. That added a whole new layer of complexity to the situation. The realization hit everyone at about the same time: there weren't enough beds. Aunt Diane's house is big, sure, but it's not that big, and every available spot had already been claimed. The air shifted almost immediately. You could see people exchanging glances, doing the mental math to figure out who might need to give up their space. My sister's kids, who were sprawled out on the couch watching TV, quickly sat up, sensing that their spot might be in jeopardy. My brother-in-law muttered something about pulling out the air mattresses, and my mom started looking around, clearly brainstorming. That's when she zeroed in on me. "You know," she said, her voice taking on that familiar tone, the one that's equal parts suggestion and command, "it might make sense for you to let Nick and Tessa have your bed. Tessa's pregnant, after all. She should have a comfortable place to sleep." The suggestion hung in the air, and everyone kind of paused, waiting to see how I'd respond. I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could even get a word out, Aunt Diane jumped in. "No, no, absolutely not," she said, waving her hands for emphasis. "She's keeping her room. Nick and Tessa can figure it out." Her tone was firm, like she wasn't even open to debating it. "You've been through enough of these holidays on couches," she added, turning to me with a knowing look. I can't tell you how much I appreciated Aunt Diane in that moment. She's hosted enough of these gatherings to know exactly what I've been through over the years. It felt validating to have her stand up for me like that, but it didn't make the situation any less uncomfortable. Nick shrugged, like he couldn't care less where he slept, but Tessa's face fell a little. She didn't say anything, but I could tell she wasn't thrilled about being relegated to the couch or an air mattress. And just like that, the room was filled with this awkward tension. In the end, Nick ended up sleeping on the couch, and Tessa was given an air mattress in the den. I didn't feel great about it, but I also didn't feel responsible. It wasn't my fault they showed up unannounced, and frankly, I didn't think it was fair to ask me to sacrifice my comfort for their surprise visit. I'd planned ahead, confirmed my sleeping arrangements, and stuck to my boundaries. But my mom didn't see it that way. She cornered me later that night and started lecturing me about how I was being a bad guest and a selfish family member. "You should have insisted that Nick and Tessa take your bed," she said. "Especially since Tessa is pregnant. How could you let her sleep on an air mattress?" I tried to explain my side. I told her about my back issues and how I'd specifically clarified my sleeping arrangements before agreeing to come. I reminded her that I've spent years being the one stuck on couches and deflated air mattresses while everyone else got a real bed. "I'm not doing that anymore," I said. "I deserve to be comfortable too." But she wasn't having it. She kept saying things like, "You're single, it's not that big of a deal, and they're a couple, and she's pregnant, you should have been more considerate." The whole situation has left me feeling torn. On one hand, I don't think I did anything wrong. Nick and Tessa showed up uninvited, and Aunt Diane made it clear that she wanted me to keep my room. But on the other hand, I can't shake the guilt. I know Tessa is pregnant, and I feel bad that she had to sleep on an air mattress. Now my mom keeps bringing it up, and I can't tell if she's right or if she's just being unfair. So, Reddit, AITA for keeping my bed and letting Nick and Tessa figure it out. Update 1. The morning after Nick and Tessa's surprise arrival started off relatively calm, but it wasn't long before things took a turn. I woke up feeling well rested for once, something I wasn't used to at family gatherings like this. I stretched out in the queen bed, thankful that Aunt Diane had stuck to her word and ensured I had a comfortable place to sleep. I could hear the faint clinking of dishes and quiet chatter from downstairs, signaling that the household was starting to wake up. I took my time getting ready, savoring the rare feeling of not waking up achy and grumpy from a bad night's sleep. But my peaceful morning was short-lived. As I made my way downstairs and into the kitchen to grab a cup of coffee, I saw Tessa standing by the counter. She was nursing a cup of tea and looked like she'd been waiting for me. As soon as our eyes met, she made a beeline for me, her expression somewhere between annoyed and expectant. "Good morning," I said, trying to sound pleasant as I stepped into the kitchen. I had barely poured myself a cup of coffee before I noticed Tessa standing off to the side, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She wasn't looking at me directly at first, but as soon as I spoke, her head snapped up like she had been waiting for this moment. Her expression wasn't outright angry, but there was something sharp in her eyes, something that immediately made my stomach tighten. The air between us felt heavy, charged with tension that I hadn't expected. She didn't bother with small talk. "I was waiting for you to come find me," she said, her tone clipped. There wasn't a trace of warmth in her voice, and the way she said it made it clear that she'd been stewing on something all morning. I blinked, taken aback. Her words were confusing, and for a moment, I thought maybe I had misheard her. "Come find you?" I asked, frowning slightly as I tried to piece together what she was talking about. "Why would I need to do that?" She let out a breath, one of those annoyed sighs that people do when they're trying to communicate just how unreasonable they think you're being. "Your mother said you wanted to apologize and explain everything to me," she said, her voice sharp but measured, like she was trying not to outright accuse me of something but couldn't quite hide her irritation. That threw me for a loop. "My mom said what?" I stared at her, my confusion growing by the second. "Apologize? Explain what?" I asked, my voice genuinely baffled. I had no idea what she was talking about, but the way she was looking at me, like I was supposed to grovel at her feet, was starting to make my skin crawl. Tessa's eyes narrowed slightly, and she let out another one of those sighs, this one more exasperated. "You mean to tell me you don't know what I'm talking about?" she said, her words slow and deliberate, like she thought I was playing dumb. "Your mother told me that you wanted to clear the air about why you stayed in the bed while I was stuck on an air mattress." And there it was. Suddenly, it all clicked into place. Of course my mom had to get involved. Of course, she couldn't let things be. I felt my stomach sink as the realization washed over me. My mom had apparently decided to take it upon herself to smooth things over, probably assuming I'd eventually come around to her way of thinking. Except, instead of making things better, she'd created an even bigger mess. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady and calm, even though I could feel the frustration bubbling up inside me. "Tessa," I said, forcing myself to look her in the eye, "I have no idea what my mom told you, but I never said anything like that. I didn't tell her I wanted to apologize or explain anything. I don't know why she said that, but I'm just as confused as you are right now." Tessa's expression shifted slightly, her eyes widening as if she wasn't sure whether to believe me. For a brief moment, I thought she might let it go, but then her lips pressed together in a tight line, and she squared her shoulders like she was gearing up for a fight. "Well," she said, her tone still firm, "then let's hear it anyway. I think I deserve an explanation. Why did you get to sleep in the bed while I was stuck on the air mattress? I'm 6 months pregnant. Shouldn't that have been obvious?" Her words hit me like a slap. The sheer entitlement in her tone was almost stunning, but I managed to keep my face neutral as I processed what she'd said. I could feel my heartbeat picking up, though, a mix of disbelief and irritation coursing through me. For a few seconds, I just stared at her, trying to find the right words to respond without completely losing my cool. Finally, I took another deep breath and forced myself to speak as calmly as possible. "Look," I said, keeping my tone steady, "when you and Nick showed up, it was last minute. Aunt Diane had already made the sleeping arrangements, and she said from the beginning that I was keeping my room and my bed. That was her decision, not mine. I just went along with what she said." Tessa shook her head, clearly unimpressed, her tea sloshing slightly in her mug as her grip tightened around it. She set the cup down on the counter with a loud clink, the sound punctuating her irritation. But you could have given up your spot, she said, her voice rising slightly, like she was trying to hammer home what she clearly thought was a point so obvious it didn't need to be explained. You didn't have to wait for someone to tell you to do the right thing. I'm pregnant, for God's sake. The way she said it, with that exasperated edge, like I was some oblivious villain in her story, hit me hard. But I wasn't about to let her bulldoze me with guilt. I squared my shoulders, meeting her gaze directly, and forced my voice to remain steady, though my patience was already wearing thin. Why? I asked plainly. Why should I have given up my bed? Her face twisted slightly, a mixture of shock and disbelief, like I'd just suggested something completely outrageous. She blinked at me a couple of times, her lips parting as if to say something, but nothing came out right away. Finally, she managed to find her voice. Because I'm pregnant, she said, her tone heavy with the kind of incredulity that made it clear she thought the answer was so obvious it didn't even need to be said. I raised an eyebrow, refusing to give an inch. So what? I replied, my words calm but firm. That's when her jaw practically hit the floor. The reaction was almost theatrical, like something out of a bad soap opera. Her eyes went wide, her cheeks flushed, and her mouth opened and closed a few times as if she were a fish out of water, searching for the right words to respond. It was clear she hadn't anticipated that answer. I could almost see the gears turning in her head as she processed what I just said, and honestly, her stunned silence might have been funny if I wasn't so annoyed. Finally, she managed to sputter out, so what? Are you serious right now? Pregnant women should be accommodated. That's just how it is. Everyone knows that. She gestured dramatically with her hands as if trying to convey the magnitude of her point, her voice rising in indignation. I could feel a surge of frustration building in my chest, but I bit it back, refusing to let her get a rise out of me. Instead, I kept my voice as calm and measured as possible. Tessa, I began, locking eyes with her, I get that you're pregnant, and I understand that it's not easy. I'm not trying to downplay that. But being pregnant doesn't mean you automatically get to dictate what everyone else does. You're not entitled to my bed just because you're having a baby. That was your choice, and it doesn't mean the rest of us have to rearrange everything to make you comfortable. Her face went an even deeper shade of red at that. I wasn't sure if it was anger, embarrassment, or a mix of both, but it was clear she wasn't used to being challenged like this. Her lips pressed into a tight line for a moment before she finally spoke. That's unbelievably selfish, she snapped, her tone biting and accusatory. You're acting like I'm asking for something unreasonable. It's not a big deal to give up your bed for one night. I could feel my frustration bubbling up to the surface now, threatening to spill over, but I held it in check. I refused to let her bait me into an argument that was going to spiral out of control. Instead, I took a slow, steady breath and kept my tone level, though there was no mistaking the firmness in my words. Tessa, you're asking me to give up something I was assigned fair and square because you think your pregnancy automatically gives you priority. I'm sorry, but that's not how this works. I'm not being selfish, I'm respecting the arrangements that were already made. If Aunt Diane had told me to move, I would have. But she didn't. She told me to stay in my bed, and I'm not going to feel guilty about following her instructions. I shook my head, refusing to back down. You know what's unreasonable? Showing up unannounced and expecting everyone to bend over backward to accommodate you. I've spent years sleeping on couches and air mattresses at these family gatherings. I've woken up sore and miserable more times than I can count. This year, I finally stood up for myself and made sure I had a proper bed to sleep in. I'm not going to apologize for that. Tessa looked like she didn't know how to respond, but I wasn't finished. And another thing, I continued, my voice firm but calm. If sleeping on the air mattress was such a problem, why didn't you swap with Nick? He slept on the couch, didn't he? You could have taken that. Her expression darkened. Nick was tired, she said defensively. He worked all week and needed the rest. It made more sense for him to have the couch. I couldn't help but laugh, though it wasn't a happy laugh. And you don't think I was tired too? Do you think I just waltzed in here feeling fresh as a daisy? I work full-time, just like everyone else. I needed the rest just as much as anyone. That's why I stayed in the bed I was assigned. Tessa crossed her arms, clearly fuming. This is ridiculous, she muttered, shaking her head. I can't believe you're being so selfish. And I can't believe you're making this much drama over one night on an air mattress, I shot back. You're not the first person to sleep on one, and you won't be the last. I've done it plenty of times, and I survived just fine. You'll survive too. As soon as I finished speaking, Tessa stood there for a moment, staring at me like she couldn't believe what she had just heard. Her mouth twitched, and I could almost see the fury simmering behind her wide eyes. For a second, I thought she might argue more, but instead, she turned abruptly and stormed out of the kitchen. Her footsteps were heavy, almost stomping as she moved through the hallway, and I could hear her muttering to herself under her breath. I didn't catch all of it, but the words selfish and unbelievable rang out clear enough. I took a long sip of my coffee, trying to collect myself, hoping that maybe she would just cool off somewhere else in the house and this whole thing would blow over. But I was wrong. So wrong. Not even a minute later, I heard Tessa's voice echo through the house, loud and sharp. I'm pregnant, and she doesn't even care, she shouted, her words bouncing off the walls. The volume and tone were so jarring that I nearly spilled my coffee. The air in the house shifted immediately, the low hum of morning activity suddenly halting as everyone froze, trying to figure out what was going on. Within seconds, I could hear footsteps coming from all directions as family members rushed to see what the commotion was about. My sister poked her head out of the den, her kids trailing behind her with wide eyes. My mom came hustling down the stairs, her face a mix of concern and confusion. Even Aunt Diane appeared from the backyard, holding a tray of freshly picked herbs, her eyebrows raised in alarm. Nick, who had been sitting on the couch scrolling through his phone, stood up quickly, looking bewildered. And there was Tessa, standing in the middle of the hallway like some kind of wronged queen, her arms crossed over her chest and her face flushed red. She pointed toward the kitchen, where I was still standing, and began unloading her grievances for everyone to hear. She doesn't care that I'm pregnant. Tessa exclaimed, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and what seemed like the beginnings of tears. I'm 6 months along, and she let me sleep on an air mattress while she got a queen bed all to herself. Who does that? How selfish can you be? The hallway was now packed with people, everyone looking between Tessa and me like they were trying to piece together what had happened. I stayed in the kitchen, gripping my coffee mug like a lifeline, feeling the heat of all those eyes on me. My stomach churned with a mix of frustration and embarrassment, but I refused to let it show. I had done nothing wrong, and I wasn't about to let Tessa's dramatics make me feel otherwise. Nick was the first to react. He stepped toward Tessa, his hands held up as if to calm her down, his face a mix of confusion and discomfort. Tessa, maybe, he started, but she cut him off with a wave of her hand. No. Everyone needs to know how selfish she is. Tessa interrupted, her voice growing louder with every word. I'm pregnant, carrying an actual human being, and she couldn't even do the decent thing and give me the bed for one night. One night. What kind of person does that? Her words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment, no one said anything. My mom glanced at me, her expression unreadable, while my sister looked downright uncomfortable. The kids were staring at Tessa with wide, curious eyes, clearly unsure of why this grown woman was yelling in the middle of the house. Nick, meanwhile, looked mortified. He reached for Tessa's arm, his voice quiet but firm as he tried to de-escalate the situation. Tessa, maybe you just need to rest, he said, his tone more measured this time. Come on, let's go sit down. But Tessa wasn't done. She pulled her arm away, still fuming, and gestured wildly in my direction. She doesn't care, she repeated, her voice shaking. I'm pregnant, and she's acting like that doesn't mean anything. Pregnant women deserve to be accommodated. It's common sense. And instead, she gets to sleep in a bed while I'm stuck on the floor. It's ridiculous. Nick sighed heavily, clearly exhausted, and finally stepped between her and the rest of the family. Okay, let's just go sit down, he said firmly, guiding her toward one of the smaller sitting rooms off the hallway. Tessa reluctantly let him lead her away, still muttering under her breath about how unfair the whole situation was. As they disappeared into the other room, the rest of the family slowly turned their attention back to me. The silence was deafening for a few seconds before Aunt Diane spoke up, her voice calm but firm. Don't worry about it, she said, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing. She's pregnant, and her emotions are all over the place. This isn't your fault. I nodded, grateful for her support, though my stomach was still in knots. My mom, however, was glaring at me, her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't say anything, but I could tell she wasn't happy. My sister gave me a small shrug, as if to say, what can you do? The family slowly dispersed after that, murmuring amongst themselves. The kids went back to their cartoons, Aunt Diane headed back to the kitchen, and my sister ushered her kids into the den. I stayed where I was, taking a few deep breaths to calm myself down. Aunt Diane was right, this wasn't my fault. I had done what I was supposed to do, and Tessa's theatrics were her own problem, not mine. Update 2. That night, as everyone started to settle down, I was determined to avoid any further drama. I made a point of heading to my room a little earlier than usual, hoping to get in bed and out of sight before Tessa could stir up anything else. I wasn't in the mood for another confrontation, especially with everyone else around to witness it. But as I walked into the hallway and reached for the door to my room, I stopped in my tracks. The door was already open, and there she was. Tessa, sprawled out on my bed, already tucked under the covers like she had claimed it for herself. She wasn't asleep, not yet, but she was lying there with her back to me, her phone in hand, scrolling as if this was the most natural thing in the world. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge me, didn't even flinch when I appeared in the doorway. It was like she had decided that the bed was hers now and that I wasn't even worth addressing about it. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at her in disbelief. My emotions surged, a mix of frustration, anger, and the smallest hint of resignation. I wanted to say something, to demand that she get out of my bed and go back to the air mattress in the den, but the memory of her shouting through the house earlier in the day held me back. I didn't have the energy for another round of drama, especially not in front of the rest of the family. They'd already had enough of a spectacle for one holiday, and so had I. So, instead of fighting, I took a deep breath, turned on my heel, and walked back down the hallway. The living room was dark and quiet, and the sofa was still free. I grabbed one of the extra blankets folded on the armchair, plopped myself down on the couch, and stretched out. It wasn't ideal, my back was already protesting at the thought of spending the night there, but at least it was drama-free. I figured it was easier to give her the bed and let her feel like she'd won than to stir up another argument and risk another round of shouting that would wake the whole house. As I lay there in the dim light of the living room, staring at the ceiling, I heard quiet footsteps approaching. I sat up slightly, expecting to see Tessa again, but it was Nick. He walked over cautiously, his hands shoved into his pockets, looking more tired than I'd ever seen him. He gestured to the other end of the couch, and I nodded, letting him sit down. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, he started, his voice soft but earnest. About all of this. About Tessa. She's just, really emotional right now. I could tell he was choosing his words carefully, trying to explain without making excuses. There was an awkward pause before he added, she's not usually like this. I think the pregnancy is just, well, it's a lot, you know. I nodded, not sure what to say. It was hard to stay mad at Nick. He wasn't the one who had caused all this drama, and he seemed genuinely apologetic. He rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable, and I decided to let him off the hook a little. "It's fine," I said, though it wasn't entirely true. "I get it. She's going through a lot." We sat there for a while, the tension slowly easing as we talked. Nick apologized again, more sincerely this time, and said he'd talk to Tessa about what had happened to make sure it wouldn't happen again. He even admitted he was a little shocked by her behavior, especially the shouting earlier in the day. "That's not like her," he said, shaking his head. "I think she's just overwhelmed." I appreciated his honesty. It felt good to have someone in the family acknowledge that what had happened wasn't fair to me, and I told him so. We ended up chatting for a while longer, talking about everything from his work to the baby on the way. By the end of the conversation, we were laughing about the absurdity of the whole situation. It felt like a weight had been lifted, like we'd found some common ground amid the chaos. Before he headed back to the guest room, Nick thanked me again and promised to smooth things over. I could tell he genuinely meant it, and that meant more to me than I realized. As I lay back down on the couch, pulling the blanket up to my chin, I felt a sense of relief. The situation wasn't perfect, and it probably wasn't over, but at least I knew I had an ally in Nick. For the first time all day, I felt like everything might actually be okay.